Congressman, 3rd District, Democrat from Virginia, Bobby Scott. Congressman Scott, great to have you with us.
John, it's good to be here. How you doing?
Good. I'm so excited that I'm getting my Dominion rebate back in August, just when my air conditioner bill goes up because of the Trump tax cut and for the deal that Frank Wagner negotiated. So I get another $70 in my pocket. I'm excited about that. But let's get to immigration.
Well, you're going to need the money, John, because the changes in healthcare policy that are made by this administration will force your health premiums to go up. So you're going to need the money.
Well, you know, I fund
they
my...
They just promulgated a regulation in the last couple of days on associated health plans, where all the insurance commissioners around the country, including I got a visit from the Virginia Health Insurance Commissioner, that said that these initiatives will have the effect of increasing prices for healthcare insurance. And the way they do that, the associated plans, they allow you to get a little group of low risk individuals, and you pay a lower price. Well, the problem is if you allow healthy people to come out of the normal plan, on average, everybody's costs are going up, and they have estimated the costs will go up significantly with this and the other initiatives of the Trump administration. So you're going to need that little tax cut.
Well, it's good for me, though, that I got out of the whole insurance business and I'm covered through a Catholic health share agency called Liberty Health Share. So I'm not even involved in it. I've already gotten out of the whole thing. So I'm in a lot better shape. But anyway, that's for another day and another topic. Let's get to immigration. The Goodlatte bill failed yesterday. The compromise bill, Scalise doesn't have the whipped votes for that. So we don't have a bill. You voted no on the Goodlatte bill. Tell us why.
Well, first of all, the bill was not a serious attempt to get legislation passed. They say it was a compromise bill, but the compromise was with themselves. There was no effort, zero effort, to try to get any Democratic votes. Now, Democrats are willing to vote for a comprehensive immigration package, similar to the one that Republicans and Democrats had agreed to a couple of years ago. But what happened to that was that the sponsors in the Senate, many of them started running for president, Mark Rubio from Texas being one, and by the time they got into a Republican primary, they were denouncing their own bill. If you're going to have a meaningful legislation, it's going to be complicated. Nobody's going to get everything they want. And we can solve a lot of problems with immigration, but you can't do it with just one side negotiating with itself. In this case, there was no real effort to solve the problem with the 12 million, with the millions of dreamers or the millions of people that are here. The bill did. I didn't see anything it did to solve the problem of ripping children from their parents that's going on at the border as we speak. And so I couldn't see who was compromising with who, but the bill didn't address the problems that we have in immigration, and it wasn't. There was no serious attempt to even try.
Two questions. The president's zero tolerance policy basically said that if you're coming across the border illegally and breaking the law, then you're just not going to get. We're going to get rid of catch and release because that is not a deterrent. It's actually a magnet because people know, hey, if I can get in front of the line, break the law, take my children with me, and I get apprehended, the majority of them, as you know, Congressman, 75% that come over the border illegally with their kids do not get apprehended. So we're only talking about the small percentage, the 25% that are actually can't elude the authorities and they get apprehended. Then they ask for asylum, and they've already broken the law, so we have a law in the country that says if you are processed for jail, your kids have to go into a facility, just like it's happening right now in Newport News, Williamsburg, Richmond, Charlotte, Miami, Chicago, Detroit, all over the United States. That's how it works. So my question is, are you in favor of just open borders, no laws, anybody comes in, they just do whatever they want? Or do you have a plan to solve this?
This is what they call the false choice debate technique, where you offer one alternative, and if you don't like that, you make up some absurdity that the other side, and then assign that to the other side. No, we need to tighten up the borders. All the people that show up at the borders are not, quote, illegal. Asylum is a legal process. Some of the people being caught up in this snatch your children from their parents are at the borders legally seeking asylum. Now,
that's just wrong.
Most of them aren't.
Congressman, that's a false statement. You cannot make false statements. Okay, that's a false statement, because if they're at the border and they want asylum, they can go to the legal asylum port of entry. And at that point, they can ask for asylum, and they're not separated from their children. And until they come over the border illegally, they're not doing anything illegal. If they just stand there, they're not doing anything illegal. So it's only after they've said, I'm not going to the port of entry, I'm not going to claim asylum legally.
The port of entry has been denying people routinely without in any process. But this
no, they're not denying it. They're telling them to wait a day.
It's obviously complicated, because when the president changed the procedure with the zero tolerance, you see it had implications on unintended consequences. The consequence of the zero tolerance and cracking down as they've cracked down is you have to take children from their parents, and that's what's going on now. That's why the president himself had to back down and try to change the policy. I don't believe he changed it enough. He hasn't dealt with the ones that have already been caught up with the situation. There's speculation that there's so many people all at once that they haven't even kept track of these people, so they don't know where the parents are and where the children are, and how they can ever get back together. In Virginia, the process for processing the parents, I saw one number that said it was over 800 days, over 2 years before the criminal process can be concluded. So what is the proposal to deal with the children in that situation? Well, this is complicated. You just can't have there is no simple solution to this. And trying to come up with a Republican bill without any Democratic input that doesn't even address the problem, it doesn't address the problem. We have a problem.
So, but I mean, the alternative to what the president did is just to perpetuate the catch and release policy, which you have to agree with me is not a policy. It doesn't. It doesn't address anything.
That has problems too. I don't like that either. But you have, if you try to cure one, you create other problems. And unless you're okay, do you like the present problem, where they're arresting people, separating families, having crying children? Okay, we don't like that either. Okay, no. Let's see if we can work together to come up with something that nothing's going to be perfect, but something that works better than what's going on today.
Well,
the bill that we voted on yesterday didn't do it.
What about the so-called compromise bill that basically amnesty to the Dreamers, does nothing to end chain migration, but it does allow for $25 billion for the president's vision for a wall? That could be effective. Why not vote for that?
Most people, including, I believe, most Republicans, think the wall is a insulting waste of money. Now, if that's the only way we can move forward with an immigration bill, I think Senator Schumer, the leader in the Senate, said that he would be willing to discuss it, but we have to first acknowledge that it is an insulting waste of money.
It wasn't a waste of money in Israel. It worked in the Gaza Strip. It worked there. Why wouldn't it work here?
Well, first of all, you can't. The construction of the wall, it would be in areas where it doesn't serve any constructive purpose. You've got eminent domain, because a lot of it is going over private lands, and so the idea that you could ever actually construct it is, people don't even know if you had the money, whether you could do it. But if it didn't solve, even though it had the wall in there, it didn't solve any of the other problems. What are you going to do with the people that are here? What are you going to do with the Dreamers? What is the process for letting people in legally? We should have a legal immigration process, but there's been no credible legislative work being done where people are discussing ideas, holding hearings, what works, what doesn't work. You get all these press releases and complaints about amnesty, complaints about children being ripped from their parents, complaints about people here illegally, complaints about not enough people coming in certain categories, and you get a lot of complaints. But this, if it was easy, we'd have done this a long time ago.
Well, that's it. I mean, we've got to solve this, and
you're not going to do it with one party sitting in a room trying to come up with a compromise that can get 218 votes, which they didn't come close.
I mean, it's not even close, and that's why the Whip Scalise had to scrap the compromise bill until next week. He's not even until they start the work, you're not gonna make any progress. In the meanwhile, there are other things going on. The higher education bill was reported from the committee I serve on, Education and Workforce, and that bill will have the effect of making college more expensive and making loans harder to pay off. And that's working its way through the legislative process. It was reported. It's waiting for floor action in the House. I don't think there's any chance it'll pass the Senate. Hopefully it won't pass the Senate. But you have a bill there that is working its way through the process, and nobody's even discussing it. Well, what
student
about
loans will be harder to pay off if this bill passes, and nobody's even. And it passed. It came out of committee, so it's not like it doesn't have any chance of passing. And I think if they call a vote on the House, well, every Republican in the House, every Republican in the committee voted for the bill. So if every Republican on the floor voted for it, it obviously passed. And so you have legislation that'll make student loans more expensive, and nobody's even talking about it.
Well, let's talk about it now.
Criminal justice reform. We're trying to make progress on that. A bill to incentivize people in prison to get education and get job training and get their situation better, so when they leave prison, they're less likely to come back. That's trying to make progress. You've got the health care policy. With everything this administration has done with health care, has made your premiums more expensive. The Commonwealth of Virginia finally expanded Medicaid. That's going to have the effect, because that's going to be hundreds of thousands of fewer people going to the hospital and not paying, that when you go, you got to pay a little extra to cover what they didn't pay. Well, they're going to be paying, and they're going to be paying with federal money that we've already paid our taxes for the federal money. So everybody's premium will be going down, and that's probably in the range of a couple $100 for everybody that's buying insurance. I mean, but this administration, with the associated health plans, with the removing the mandate and other initiatives, cutting back on outreach, has had the effect. And you can ask insurance commissioners. You ought to get the insurance commissioner from Virginia in to talk about what impact federal policy on health care is having on premiums that people in Virginia have to pay. Well, but that's not being discussed because they're trying to get a political solution to the immigration problem.
Well, you just contradicted yourself, Congressman Scott, because you just said premiums for Virginians are coming down because of Medicaid expansion, which, by the way, I was in favor of. We're getting all the federal money back, coupled with the fact that now, hospitals are going to get some money for people that are covered by Medicaid instead of having to do indigent care. That's going to bring costs down. So, we made progress on that.
What did I contradict myself? The expansion of Medicaid has the effect of reducing premiums for everybody in Virginia.
Right. And then you just said because of the Trump's policies, premiums are going to go up.
Federal policies on the Trump administration, initiatives that will have the impact of increasing costs, like the associated health plans, like the removal of the mandate, like what they've done with insurance company subsidies, will have the effect of raising premiums. But what Virginia did has the effect of lowering premiums.
Well, good thing I was in favor of Medicaid expansion. So
you were right on that one.
I was right on that. See, so even a blind squirrel can find the nut once in a while. Congressman, I've got to get to prison reform.
I don't know whether you're talking about yourself or talking about me, but
I'll just float it out there. Listen, I got to get to prison reform. This is a topic that you and I are very passionate about. And I've got to give you a statistic that nobody is addressing it. And it really gelled with the kids being separated from their parents who are being processed to go to jail. Do you know that right now in the prison system in the United States, do you know that 70% of people in prison today are there because they can't make bail, right? So they get arrested for something. There's no due process. They didn't have a hearing. It could be false. It could be a mistake, right? They get arrested for something. If they're with their minor children are torn from them and put into a child protective services custody facility, just like at the border is happening now. And then they go to jail and there's a $2,000 or $3,000 or $2,500 bond, and they don't have $2,500, nor can they get anybody to sign for them. So they rot in jail while we have this prison system of a cash bond. And they sit there for 60, 90, 100 days instead of getting out in 72 hours. Meantime, they can't find their kids either. What are we going to do about that?
I think you have accurately articulated the problem. There's one other addition to that, and that is that they're being held because of lack of money, not because of a risk to society.
Right.
The release, whether you get released pre-trial, ought to be risk-based. If you pose an ongoing danger to society, maybe you shouldn't get out during before trial. But if you do not pose an unreasonable risk to the public, then you should be released based on risk. What we have now, as you have articulated, is a wealth-based. If you have money, you get out. If you do not have money, you stay in.
And rot.
And you've articulated the problems. Your children are gone. If you had a job, what kind of job are you going to say, well, boss, I'll be back in 2 or 3 months after the trial.
Right.
I'm innocent, but I got to wait for my trial to prove, to show they can't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that I did it. In fact, I didn't do it. But it will take about 3 months while I sit in jail. You're going to have a job? If you don't have a job, how are you going to pay rent? You're going to lose your apartment. So when you come out after 3 or 4 or 5 months, you have no job, you have no apartment, and try to bounce back from that. That is unfair. You've indicated that lack of due process. Well, the process is it's wealth based, and so they ascertain whether you have the money to come out on bail. If you don't, that's your due process. Well, that's not fair. And you ought to have an assessment on
risk.
on based on risk rather than wealth. Now, some Commonwealth attorneys, another Commonwealth attorney in Richmond has articulated a new policy where people will be considered for release pre-trial based on risk, not wealth. And he's not going to be, and he's going to reverse the policy, the bad policy that you've very accurately described.
Well,
legislation in the Safe Justice Act that I've introduced, it encourages risk-based release rather than wealth-based release to eliminate that problem. And it's a waste of money. You got people who pose no risk to society on lightweight criminal offense, waiting 2 or 3 months. We're paying all that money to house them, and paying all that money when they lose their job and lose their apartment on housing money and Medicaid and food stamps and everything else they get entitled to all of a sudden. They had a job. And because of this policy, all of a sudden they're in need, when if they had been released, they could have gone back to their job and kept their apartment. So it's a colossal waste of taxpayer money.
Absolutely. And it's also discriminatory.
It's also a bad policy.
It's discriminatory against the working poor people in America. Let me give you one other statistic. I've only got a minute. That is really going to make your blood boil. So 70% of people that are in jail now can't make a cash bond, okay? That's 70%, okay? 50% of those, 50% of that 70%, you know what the average cash bond is? $2,500. $2,500. Now, if somebody is at risk to society, then they're not going. Their bond is not going to be $2,500.
If that's the bond, they could get a bondsman at about 10%. So if it's a $2,000 bond, a couple $100, they're out in the street.
But they don't have a couple $100, and they don't have anybody to get it for that.
It's a couple. Well, you said a couple of thousand. It's really a couple of hundred. Is what's keeping them in jail.
Sick.
Because all they have to do is come up with 10% of it.
And then the final thing is, right, you can't get the policy changed because of the private profit-making prison lobbyist hired on K Street by the prison companies that don't want the cash bond changed because they get paid by the bed. So the longer they stay
they get paid
jail,
by the bed, and the bondsmen get paid for people who have to pay the 10%. They get to keep the 10%.
It's sick. Okay, the policy is sick.
And the people who are against that system, like you and me, and I think if we keep at it, we'll change the system.
Well, I hope so. I'm out of time. I want to thank Bobby Scott for being with us. Congressman, remember my statistics. Keep fighting for this. Cash bond is so discriminatory towards working poor people, and nobody wants to talk about it because they're getting paid by the bed. It's sick policy.